We begin the book of Judges tonight. I'm excited. Got all the way from Genesis through Joshua. And now we make another transition. The book of Judges is a very interesting book in that it's got its highs that are just amazing to see God perform miracles. And then it's got some pretty low lows. And that the children of Israel would wander from God. And I think it's an incredible picture for us because, it really does give us how fickle the heart of man is. How easy it is for us to begin to veer or sway from the things that God desires to do in our lives. And it gives us such an incredible picture. Now, chapters 1 and 2, it's broken into basically 3 parts. Chapters 1 and 2, we're going to kind of get the spiritual condition of the nation. We're going to do a little bit of review of the things that we looked in the book of Joshua. From chapters 3 to chapter 16, we're going to see 12 different judges deliver the nation of Israel from decline. And then chapter 17 to 21 just shows how far the nation of Israel departs from God. The last verse of the book of Judges, turn there real quick, I think it just summarizes for us chapter 21, the very last verse in verse 25. It says this: in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. See, by the time we get to the end of the book of Judges, we're left in a very desperate place for a nation. When everyone starts to do whatever's right in his own eyes rather than what's right in God's eyes, you have a nation that's ready to fall. That's ready to come undone at the seams. And I think you look at kind of the condition of our nation. You just wonder how far are we from that place where everyone just doing what's right in their own eyes rather than what God declares to be right. The problem with man is when we do what's right in our own eyes, it's whatever is gratifying to our desires rather than truth according to God. Now, that decline took many generations. But in the middle of that, you're going to see them, following the Lord, and then one leader dies, and then they go right back into their old life and take it a little step further, and then God will raise up someone else. It's just continual pattern that you'll see in the book of Judges, where they forsake God. And then God allows the enemies of the nation to take ground and bring them under their rule. And then they cry out to the Lord, and then the Lord listens to them, and he sends that deliverer to deliver them from their problem, from their oppression. And as long as that deliverer is alive, they do fine. But as soon as he dies, they go right back into their old life again. And it's this continual cycle that the nation of Israel experienced. Now, Remember, Israel was taken or had been brought into slavery in Egypt. Joseph had taken the children of Israel there because of a famine. The brothers joined him, and they multiplied there. And God had blessed the fruit of their womb, let's say. There was a lot of them. Matter of fact, a couple million of them. But they were in slavery, they were in bondage, and then God sends Moses to deliver them and frees them from the bondage of slavery. He takes them through the wilderness for 40 years, sustains them, and then brings them into the promised land. And as they're in the promised land, they acquired much wealth, had great power. And that's where Joshua goes off the scene. He had pulled them aside a couple times and says, guys, you got to choose. Who are you going to serve? You're going to serve God, or you're going to serve the gods of this world? You're going to serve the living God, or you're going to serve all of the gods of the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Hittites? And they said, no, we want to serve the Lord. And now it's not even a generation that goes by, and they're right back where they were. Now, chapter 1 of the book of Judges is a review of much of what we looked at in the book of Joshua. So we're going to cover that quickly, and then we're going to jump into chapter 2, and we'll just kind of comment along the way. Notice chapter 1, it says, and after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? Now, Joshua had been in the land for many years before he died. Joshua died, and they still hadn't taken the land that they had been given. Joshua is off the scene, and the children of Israel are asking God for direction. That's a good thing. They're actually saying, God, what do we do now? How do we defeat the enemy? And they're seeking after the Lord. It tells us there in verse 2, and the Lord instructed them, Judah shall go up indeed. I have delivered the land into his hand. Now, there was some way of them communicating to God, and God instructing them on how they were to proceed. And they're asking God, what do we do now? And they said, you know what, I want you to send Judah, and they're going to win this battle against the Canaanites. And you know, what an incredible beginning they had. You know, we're going to seek God. We want to know God's will. We want to know what God desires of us. You know, God, what do we do here? God gives them clear instructions. Judah, you go, you defeat them. Now, that may have been God saying, you know, not them, not them, not them, but them. Judah goes in. Now, Judah in verse 3 said to Simeon, his brother, come up with me to my allotted territory that we might fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. Now, God had already delivered the Canaanites into his hand. It was already a done deal. God says, you know, go and I'll take care of it for you, Judah. Judah turns around and he says, hey, Simeon, you going to go with us? We'll go up together. You know, we'll have a little bit better chances if we have two tribes rather than just one tribe. And Simeon agrees, and they end up going into the battle with them. And notice verse 4, Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites, the Perizzites, into their hands, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek. Now, that's the only place you would find Adoni-Bezek. He's in Bezek. They fought against him. They defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Now, Bezek is we're going to find out, he wasn't a nice guy. He was the king of the Canaanites that they went to defeat, and they finally, wiped out 10,000 of the men. They finally find the king. And it tells us there in verse 6 that Adonai-Bezek fled, they pursued him, they caught him, and they cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Now, to cut off somebody's thumbs in that day, that meant you can't swing a sword. You're basically done. You can't even hold the sword to fight anymore. And then you cut off the big toe, and he can't run. All your balance is in your big toe. And so you've just debilitated him from really having any kind of ability to defend himself. And so he's there with no thumbs, no big toes. And you might what's up with that? Now watch Adonai-Bezek comments on what had happened. And Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather under my table as I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Now, he had done the same thing to 70 other men. Now, you go, that's weird. He had cut off the toes and thumbs of 70 other guys, and there he is without his toes and thumbs. Maybe the children of Israel were aware of his treatment of other kings, and they brought it back to him. But I think there's a principle here, guys. Whatever a man sows is what he's going to reap. You sow to the flesh, you're going to reap corruption. You sow to the spirit, you reap everlasting life. Those are biblical principles. If you're sowing in your life spiritual things, you're going to reap the spiritual benefits of those things. But if you're sowing into your life cardinal things, it's just going to continue to escalate. The spiritual appetite, the physical appetite, if you're sowing, cardinal things into your life. And what's incredible in this whole picture is you're going to see this play out in the life of Israel. Whatever they're sowing, that's what they end up reaping. Whatever it is they're investing in their lives, that's what comes forth out of their life. Both for good and for evil. And I think that principle isn't a principle that is based upon earthly conclusions. It's a crazy thing because, there's so many different religions take that same philosophy. It's karma. It's, whatever goes around comes around. There's that idea. This is something beyond just, another idea. This is God's principles that he bases his life on and your life on. Whatever you're sowing, whatever you're investing in, whatever you're putting in, that's what's going to come out. And it's interesting that Adonai-Bezek even understood that principle. Look, I did it to 70 other guys, now it's turned on me. And that principle really is one that will hold true all the way to the end. And so he makes acknowledgement that that this is why this has happened. Now, verse 8 it says, the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem. They took it, they struck it with the edge of the sword, and they set the city on fire. And afterwards, the children of Judah went down to the fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. The name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba. And they killed Sheshaiah, Ahiman, and Talmai. And there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath Sepher. And Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I'll give my daughter Achsah as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so he gave him his daughter Achish as wife. Now we looked at that in Judges, in Joshua chapter 15, and they were in there taking ground. Caleb says, hey, you take that ground. Now, it was one of the, most fierce armies that they would face. He said, you take that ground, and I'm going to give you my daughter to be your wife. Now, she must have been good looking. Because this guy says, hey, give it to me. Bring it on. He goes out there and he takes, goes and wipes out that group of people, and he takes his daughter as his wife. And it happened when they came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field, and she dismounted from her donkey. And Caleb said to her, what do you wish? She said to him, give me a blessing, since you've given me the land in the south. Give me the springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. And the children of the Kenite, Moses, his father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad. And they went and they dwelt among the people. And Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited in Ziphath, and they utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza and its territory, Ashkelon and its territory, Ekron and its territory. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. Then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak. Now, if you remember, Anak was the descendants of the giants. And Caleb just, went for it. He was 85 years old at the time. He's going there, give me the giants. I'm not going to waste my time with anyone else. Give me the big guys. Because his confidence was in the Lord. And he just goes in and destroys the giants in the land. Remember, it was the giants that brought fear to the children of Israel, so that they didn't enter the promised land 38 years earlier. But Caleb had great confidence in the Lord, and he goes in and he takes that land. So verse 21, the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusite dwelt with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Now, it's believed that Samuel would have been the one writing the book of Judges. And when Samuel's saying, this is what's happening to this day, it was prior to King David, because King David does defeat this particular territory, and he does defeat the Jebusites, and he brings great victory to the children of Israel. Now, look at verse 22, and we're getting there. Look, watch this. And the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The house of Joseph sent men to spy out Bethel. The name of that city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of that city, they said to him, please show us the entrance of the city, and we will show you mercy. And he showed them the entrance of the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all of his family go. And that man went out to the land of the Hittites, built a city called the name Luz, which is the name to this day. Now, there were those who had a great desire to do what God had instructed them to do. In the beginning, they were going out and had great exploits. They were taking the land. They were defeating the enemy. And the book of Judges reminds us that there was a remnant of them that had a passion to do what God had asked them to do. Victory by Caleb and by those of Judah and those of Simeon. And, they're going in and they're just, taking steps of faith. They're trusting the Lord. They're doing what God had instructed. And then we come to verse 27 and it says, however. Now, notice the transition. God was doing all of these things. However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and its villages. Now, if you've been to Israel with us, there's a Roman city, Bethshan, and in Bethshan, they've unearthed it, and you can still see the original roads. Back to the days of Samuel, and it's an incredible dig and an incredible find as they've unearthed all of this stuff, and it's just an amazing place. They couldn't take that particular land. Now, he says they couldn't take Tanoch and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in the land. And so we're looking at all the things God was able to do with those who were willing to trust him, but there were also a group of people who weren't willing to take out the enemy, to obey the things that God had instructed them. Now remember, God had told them, go in and wipe out the inhabitants of the land because they'll end up influencing you for evil if they live amongst you. They'll end up being the ones who persuade you to worship their gods if you don't utterly destroy them, if you don't completely annihilate them from dwelling with you. They're going to be that slow but sure influence in your life. And so God had given them that instructions, and we find here Manasseh didn't do it. Look at verse 28. And it came to pass when Israel was strong, and they put the Canaanites under tribute, but they did not completely drive them out. Now, they had the ability to do it. If you don't put somebody under tribute unless you're more powerful within them. They said, instead of wiping them out, we'll just tax them. We'll just make them, pay us for living. They were doing what was right in their own eyes rather than what God had instructed them to do. And so these guys will come back to hunt them later. Watch this. Look at verse 29. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer. So the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Kahalal. So the Canaanites dwelt among them and were put under tribute. Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Elab, Akzib, Helba, Aphik, and Rehob. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out, nor did Naphtali. Now these are the different tribes and the different territories, and they're allowing the enemy to dwell amongst them, to be the influence later to their children and to their children's children. And all of this is brought as the introduction to the book of Judges, because as you're watching the book of Judges play out, you're going, man, how did they get that messed up? How did they get influenced so quickly? It's because they weren't willing to do what God had instructed them to do at the first. And you let a little bit of leaven in, and that little bit of leaven permeates the whole lump. You see, sin has the tendency to reproduce itself. It spreads. It can't be contained. You can't go, well, I'm going to have this little compartment that, just this one pet sin. I don't want to get rid of this one pet sin. I'm just going to kind of keep that guy in its box. But the problem is you can't keep it in a box. It grows. And it grows. And it grows. So that rather than you keeping it as your little pet sin, it becomes your master. It becomes what owns you and what rules you eventually. That's why Paul in the book of Romans would say, do not be conformed to this world. Don't let the world shape you. What you need to do is you need to renew your mind. You need to discover what God desires for you and obey the things He's instructed you, because then you're going to be able to prove what's the good and the perfect and the acceptable will of God. Right? If you're allowing the world to be what dictates right and wrong, then you're going to constantly be heading the wrong direction. And so the children of Israel had these influences that they never dealt with. It tells us there in verse 34, the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell on Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shelbim. Yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they put them under tribute. And the boundary of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. Now, even when Naphtali had the ability to do what God told them to do, they weren't willing to do what God had told them to do. They just put them under tribute. We'll just have you guys, pay us money. We're going to get some benefit from this rather than doing what God told us to do. We're going to do something that's going to benefit us rather than obey. Now, chapter 2. And the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum, and he said, I led you up from Egypt. I brought you to the land which I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Now, the angel of the Lord, this is what is referred to as a Christophany. It's the appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament. We find him talking to Abraham, the angel of the Lord. We find him wrestling with Jacob, the angel of the Lord. God's presence, God's appearance, and the angel of the Lord comes and he reminds them, look guys, I led you up from Egypt, and I brought you to the land of which I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Now God's end of the bargain was, look, this covenant that I made between me and you is dependent upon me. I will never break the covenant. When God had talked to Abram, he says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. God's blessing. Nowhere have I found in Scripture where God changed that blessing to mean something else. I believe that blessing is still true today to the children of Israel. You bless Israel, you get blessed. You curse Israel, you're going to have God's hand and God's curse upon your life. You see, God is the one who makes the promises. And God said, look, I promised you this. But along the way, there were some conditions on how that blessing looked. Notice what he says in verse 2. And you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Now God's telling, look, I'm not going to change. That was my covenant that I made with you. But there was also the part where you were supposed to obey me. You were supposed to tear down their altars, no longer worshiping the false gods. But you haven't done what you were supposed to do. Now, even though the children of Israel were going to have God's correction, even though the children of Israel were going to experience God's correction in their life, God doesn't negate his promises to them. That's why whenever they call to him, God answers them. That's why whenever they get to the end of themselves and they finally say, okay, God, we blew it, we're sorry, would you please help us? God would send a deliverer to them, because God doesn't go back on his promises. But God also can't bless sin and rebellion. It's against his nature. And I think, as a parent, you get it a little bit, right? You want to bless your children. You want to give them the best. You want them to succeed. You want to set them up to succeed. You want to see them prosper. But if they're living a rebellious life, you can't bless them the way you would want to bless them, because it's going to cause them more damage than good. You're teaching them that, living rebellious is somehow rewarded. And that just causes a wrong perception, a wrong understanding. And as a parent, you kind of like, man, if you would just do what you're supposed to do, man, I want to bless you. Now, it's interesting that God brings to their attention, you guys won't obey my voice. You won't even do the things that I've asked you to do. Why have you done this? Look at verse 3. Therefore, I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be thorns in your side. Their God shall be a snare to you. And so it was, when the angel of the Lord spoke these words to the children of Israel, that the people lifted up their voices and they wept. And they called the name of that place Bochum. And they sacrificed there to the Lord. And when Joshua had dismissed the people, the children of Israel went each to his own inheritance to possess the land. Now, remember, we're doing an overview. He's reminding them, look, remember what's happened. God's already given you, the warning. He's already told you what he would do and how he would deal with you. And then Joshua gave them the warning in Joshua chapter 23 and chapter 24, choose who you're going to serve. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And so he once again brings to their attention, and then he also reminds us in verse 7, so the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old. And they buried him within the borders of his inheritance, Timnath Heres, in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gosh. And when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the works which he had done for Israel. The generation dies off. They had seen God provide for them in the wilderness. They had seen God defeat the enemy as they went into the promised land. And that whole generation goes to the grave, goes off the scene. And a whole nother generation arises that does not know the Lord and never seen the works of the Lord. And it only takes one generation to completely turn their backs on God. I'm praying the Lord would awaken this next generation. You go back just 50, 60 years, and our nation had a whole different character. You go back 60, 70 years, a generation ago, and you realize, back in the 60s and 50s, and there was this awareness that God is the one who had founded this nation. One nation under God. Back in the 60s, they would start every day with prayer. They'd start every day with reading a psalm in the classroom, in the public schools. They would start every day saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Now, not only do you not pray at school, that's against the law. Not only you cannot read a Bible at school, it's against the law. But now saying the Pledge of Allegiance is even controversial, and in many school districts not even allowed. One generation. And as that generation grows up, they have no awareness of who God is. They have no understanding of spiritual things. This past weekend, we were at the park and having the outreach, and I got the chance to talk to a couple of young men, probably 17, 18-year-old boys, and I started to talk to them about the Lord, and I began to ask them questions of what they know about God, and it just blew my mind. They never heard the gospel in their whole life. No one had told them why Jesus had come into the world and what the Bible declared about that. And, I'm just sitting there just dumbfounded that we have a whole generation growing up that has no idea of biblical truth. When we're a nation that was based and built upon biblical truth. It's sad. And this generation here in verse 10, he says, look, this whole generation grew up and they did not know the Lord, nor any of the works which he had done for the nation of Israel. Verse 11 says, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served the Baals. Now the Baals were the gods of the Canaanites. Balaam. And what's interesting is man has this innate desire to worship. You're going to worship something or someone. So if you're not going to worship the Lord, you're going to end up worshiping something other than the Lord. It's ingrained in us. I think we were designed the way when God created us, we have this desire to worship. The object of your worship could be pleasure, wealth, riches, fame, success, education. But you're going to give yourself to something. And once the children of Israel forsook God, they had to replace God with something less than the Baals. And so there they are worshiping Baals. Verse 12, they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them. Then they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord. They served Baal and the Ashtaroths. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hands of the plunderers who despoiled them and sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. And wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who had plundered them. Now, when the book of Judges talks about judges, understand, he's not talking about Judge Judy, okay? Or a people's court. Or the whole idea of a judge was one who was a heroic leader. Someone that was willing to trust God and go and do great exploits for the kingdom. Stand on truth, to come back and say, what does God say concerning these things? And then lead the people at their own risk. Willing to put it all on the line. We're going to look at many of those over the next couple of months as we're going through the book of Judges. We're going to see Deborah, one of the great leaders of Israel, a woman who was willing to just lay it on the line. And I'm willing to go to battle. If there's no men that go to battle, I'll go to battle. And then, you guys are going to be embarrassed because you wouldn't trust the Lord. And she does it. And then Gideon, what an incredible, really, you look at Gideon and he wasn't anything to behold. He was hiding when the Lord tells him to go and fight against the Midianites. But when God spoke to him, he was willing to obey. We're going to spend a lot of time on Samson. Samson was dedicated from birth to serve the Lord. But Samson was all about Samson. About gratifying his own desires and his own passions. And, it was always some woman that he was chasing after, and it ended up costing him his life. Because he wouldn't deny his fleshly appetites to say, God, I just want to be used by you. And Samson ends up getting both of his eyes plucked out. And he cries out to the Lord, Lord, let me just have one more victory. He stands between two pillars and pushes the pillars, and there was a big party with the Midianites. They're mocking Samson, and he kills scores of Midianites that day. Or not Midianites, those were different guys. That was Gideon's guys. But he ends up killing the Philistines, that's who it was. Kills just tons of Philistines. Because he finally, even though he couldn't see with his eyes, he was finally able to see with his heart. You see, God is so gracious. The moment we've come to our senses and we cry out, God, we've blown it. God, I want the wrong way. I've made bad decisions in my life. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to line my life up with what you say. I want to live for truth now. But it didn't happen until they hit their bottom. It didn't happen until they came to the end of themselves. And it's an incredible picture. It says the Lord would raise up judges for them and deliver them out of the hand of those who had plundered them. Look at verse 17. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods, and they bowed down to them, and they turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked, and obeying the commandments of the Lord. And they did not do so. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with them, was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass when the judge was dead that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. And they did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn ways. Now, it's that same cycle we're going to see over and over as we're going through the book of Judges. And I think it really should be a warning for all of us. Because that's really our tendency, isn't it? So our tendency is, oh God, I just want to serve you. My life's all messed up. I have no peace in my. And then we get to the end of ourselves, and God brings deliverance. We're not a judge. He sent His Son, the Savior, into the world to free you, to fill you with His Spirit, to guide you. And we kind of get in that area where we're like, all right, man, now I get it. Now I'm going to serve the Lord. But then all these other temptations and distractions, pursuits come along, and we have that same tendency to start to veer from the things that we know to be true. And then God's got to bring correction. I've got to let you hit the bottom again. That we wouldn't have to live that cycle. That we wouldn't have to kind of keep going down that same road. That we would learn the lesson and say, you know what, I tried it that way, and it doesn't work. Why would I want to go back there again? That was dumb. I need to do what God said, because whatever you sow, that's what you're going to reap. Whatever you invest, it's eventually, it doesn't happen overnight. Some of you guys, well, I was nice to my wife last night, and she's still mad at me. It doesn't happen overnight. You got to wait like 10 years. It takes time for the roots to go down. It takes time for the tree to mature. But eventually it bears fruit. If you just stay the course. If you just hold on, you know what, if I just do what God's asked me to do, God will bless it. I know He will. Because it's a spiritual principle that God doesn't go back on. If I just remain faithful to the things that He's instructed, I'll reap the benefits of it. It might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years. But if I start to sow to the flesh, there's going to be another crop that will come up. Oh, it might take months or years, but it'll come up. And the children of Israel are going to learn that lesson over and over again. Verse 19, let's get through the chapter. He says, and it came to pass when the judges were dead that they reverted back to their old behavior, more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them, bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn ways. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. And he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenants, which I commanded their fathers, has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord to walk in them as their father kept them or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hand of Joshua. So we have the overview of the book of Judges. And what an incredible overview. God just says, this is how this book's going to play out. It's going to be that same cycle. Now, I think there's some encouraging things as you're going through this book. Because, you kind of read some of this stuff and it's like, man, it's depressing. These guys keep doing the same thing over and over again. But I think here's the encouragement, that God is always looking for someone that's willing to make a stand. God's always searching out those that are willing to say, God, I want to yield my life to you. I want to be used by you. And when God finds that man or that woman that's willing to just say, God, I want to be used by you, God can do great exploits through that person. One of my favorite verses is 2 Chronicles 16:9, where it says, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro through the whole earth. To show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. The eyes of the Lord go to and fro through the whole earth. He's searching for that heart that would be loyal to him, so that he can show his power, he can show his might through that person that says, God, I'll be loyal to what you say, to what you declare. In the time of Ezekiel, God was going to bring destruction upon the land of Israel. And it tells us in chapter 22 in the 30th verse, he goes, I sought for a man among them who would make a wall, who would stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one. And what God was declaring, look, I was looking for that one heart that would be loyal to me so that I can show grace and mercy. Someone that was willing to sacrifice his own life so that I can show my power, that I won't have to destroy the land. He goes, but I didn't find no one. God help us. Guys, we're living in a nation that deserves God's wrath right now. And it's really easy for us to get consumed by our own lives rather than going, God, how do you want to use my life? It's really easy for us just to think, how am I going to take care of my stuff and my things, and how am I going to gratify my wants and my desires, rather than saying, God, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for you. And God's looking for that person. God is searching that person out. Now, I pray it wouldn't be like the days of Ezekiel. He goes, I couldn't find one, not even one, that's willing to obey me, who is loyal to me, who is willing to say, God, whatever you desire. You see, really the Christian life is the sacrificial life. In the book of Galatians, chapter 2, in the 20th verse, Paul the apostle would say, I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That passage is, man, so descriptive of the Apostle Paul's life. It's not about me anymore. It's about, God, what do you want from me? It's no longer my life. It's my life has been given up. Now, God, what is it that you want to do with my life? It's yours. You live in me. And it took someone with that heart and that attitude to turn the whole world upside down. One of the greatest missionaries that ever lived, one of the greatest apostles, wrote a majority of the New Testament. Because that was his heart and his attitude. And, God help us to have that same heart. Because, I want to see God bring a revival in this land. I want to see this Rio Grande Valley changed. I would love to see all of our youth freed from the bondage of drugs and alcohol and all the things that have entangled them. But it's going to take people who are willing to love them. And that costs something. And then you look at, all what God was warning the nation of Israel, saying, guys, it's all there. I've done it all for you. All I'm looking for you is to surrender. And I don't think anything's changed. God's just looking for surrendered lives. We're going to look at Gideon, surrendered life. Deborah, surrendered life. Just these that are saying, God, I'll go into the battle, and if I die. Now, here's the problem, guys. We're in a battle, and the battle doesn't end. It's real. It's not physical, it's spiritual. And we got to be willing to say, God, I'll fight this fight until my last breath. And I'm willing to lay it all down.